3:11 a.m. The Yellow Sea, 41 nautical miles west of Incheon, South Korea. The water is black and choppy, running 2-meter swells under a bitter January wind that cuts in from the northwest at 30 knots, carrying snow squalls that reduce the visibility to less than a mile. It is the worst kind of night for an amphibious assault. Cold, dark, rough, and fast. It is exactly the kind of night that the Korean People's Army planners had chosen for this reason. In conditions like these, they believed, South Korean and American surveillance assets would be degraded. Radar returns would be confused by sea clutter. Thermal sensors would struggle through precipitation. The darkness and the weather would be their allies. The target was Baengnyeong Island. Baengnyeong is the westernmost of South Korea's Yellow Sea Islands, a jagged, mountainous piece of Korean territory sitting less than 17 kilometers from the North Korean coastline, technically behind the northern limit line that has served as the de facto maritime border between the two Koreas since the armistice of 1953. On Baengnyeong, the Republic of Korea Marine Corps maintained a garrison of approximately 300 Marines, a coastal artillery battery, a naval communications relay facility, and a radar installation that served as South Korea's primary early warning sensor for Yellow Sea activity. The island was, in strategic terms, a thorn in North Korea's side, a piece of South Korean sovereign territory pressed against the North Korean coast, staring across the water at the DPRK's western coastal defenses. Kim Jong-un had been talking about Baengnyeong for 3 years. The operational plan that the Korean People's Army General Staff had prepared was audacious in its scale. 12 Kongbang-class air cushion landing craft, the KPA's most capable amphibious assault vessels, each carrying a full platoon of KPA naval infantry, plus light armor, surging across the 17 kilometers from the North Korean coast to Baengnyeong at speeds of 50 knots, crossing the distance in under 25 minutes. Simultaneously, 4 KPA hovercraft would land on the smaller neighboring island of Sucheong, 3 kilometers south, to prevent reinforcement from that direction. Above the assault force, 12 Mi-24 Hind attack helicopters would suppress the ROK Marine garrison's defensive positions, while 2 Il-76 transport aircraft circled offshore, prepared to airdrop additional KPA Special Operations Forces onto the island's central plateau if the initial assault stalled. The total assault force, 600 KPA naval infantry, 12 armored personnel carriers, 4 anti-aircraft guns, and the full weight of KPA coastal artillery from the mainland. Over 40 artillery pieces of various calibers pre-aimed at the island's known defensive positions, prepared to open a suppression barrage the moment the landing craft crossed the northern limit line. In Pyongyang, Kim Jong-un had been briefed by his generals with confidence. The assault would be over in 90 minutes. Baengnyeong would be in KPA hands before dawn, and the world, and most critically the people of South Korea, would wake to the reality that North Korea could take South Korean territory at will. The psychological impact would be devastating. The political consequences in Seoul would be enormous. The proof of concept that the Kim regime could act, could win, could embarrass the United States and its treaty obligations, would reverberate across the entire Indo-Pacific and reshape the regional security calculus in ways that favored Pyongyang. The plan was meticulous. The training had been extensive. The timing had been chosen with care. Kim Jong-un had made 5 catastrophic mistakes. First mistake: the Yellow Sea was not blind. The weather that the KPA planners had chosen as their ally, the snow squalls, the low visibility, the radar sea clutter, had degraded South Korean and American optical and visual surveillance assets exactly as planned. What it had not degraded were the acoustic sensors, the U.S. Navy's sound surveillance system, the SOSUS-equivalent fixed hydrophone arrays that had been quietly installed on the Yellow Sea floor over a series of covert engineering operations spanning 7 years. was entirely unaffected by surface weather. The acoustic signatures of 12 Kongbang-class air cushion landing craft spinning up their gas turbine engines at their base in Koampo Naval Station at 2:44 a.m. were detected, classified, and reported to U.S. Forces Korea within 6 minutes. By 2:51 a.m., 20 minutes before the landing craft crossed the NLL. Combined Forces Command in Seoul had received the alert. By 2:54 a.m., the ROK Marine garrison on Baengnyeong had received a warning order and was standing to its defensive positions in the dark. Second mistake. The Mi-24 attack helicopters had been tracked departing their base. A Global Hawk high-altitude surveillance drone, operating at 65,000 feet above the weather, invisible to any North Korean sensor, had been maintaining persistent surveillance of KPA military activity on the western coast for 11 consecutive days following intelligence indicators that an amphibious operation was being planned. At 2:38 a.m., the Global Hawk synthetic aperture radar detected the thermal signatures of 12 Mi-24 rotor systems spinning up at Ongjin Airfield. The data was transmitted to U.S. Forces Korea within 90 seconds. It was the second major indicator, after the acoustic detection of the landing craft, that confirmed the operation was underway. Combined Forces Command had both data points by 2:52 a.m. The response was already being ordered. Third mistake. The KPA had no idea that USS Wasp was 49 miles away. The Wasp-class amphibious assault ship had been conducting what was publicly described as a routine exercise with the ROK Navy in the southern Yellow Sea. She had been operating under partial emissions control and was not broadcasting on AIS, the commercial vessel tracking system that North Korean maritime surveillance relied on to build their picture of U.S. naval dispositions. Aboard USS Wasp, 840 Marines of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, 12 AV-8B Harriers, 8 AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters, 6 UH-1Y Venom utility helicopters, 12 MV-22 Osprey tiltrotors. When the execute order arrived from Combined Forces Command at 2:57 a.m., USS Wasp was already turning north at flank speed. Her AH-1Z Vipers were airborne within 9 minutes. At their maximum cruise speed of 265 kilometers per hour, Baengnyeong was 22 minutes away. Fourth mistake. U.S. Air Force assets were already airborne. The 51st Fighter Wing at Osan Air Base and the 8th Fighter Wing at Kunsan Air Base had been placed on elevated alert status 48 hours earlier, following the same intelligence indicators that had prompted the Global Hawk surveillance tasking. 4 F-16CJs, the specialized Wild Weasel variant equipped for suppression of enemy air defenses, had been on strip alert at Osan since 6 p.m. the previous evening. 4 F-35A, Lightning IIs from the 35th Fighter Wing at Misawa, Japan, had transited to Osan in a classified deployment 18 hours earlier. Their arrival kept off all public schedules. When the alert arrived at Osan at 2:53 a.m., 8 combat aircraft were on the runway within 4 minutes. 8 more were airborne within 11 minutes. The airspace between Osan Air Base and Baengnyeong Island, a distance of approximately 120 kilometers, takes an F-35A less than 10 minutes to cover at combat power. Fifth mistake. The coastal artillery barrage revealed every gun position. When the KPA's 40-plus artillery pieces opened their suppression barrage against Baengnyeong's defensive positions at 3:09 a.m., 2 minutes before the landing craft crossed the NLL. Their muzzle flashes and radar returns were immediately detected by the AN/TPQ-53 Firefinder counter-battery radar systems that the U.S. Army had permanently positioned on Baengnyeong and on the neighboring island of Daecheong specifically to perform this function. Every firing position was plotted, classified, and transmitted to the Fire Mission Coordination Center at Combined Forces Command within 40 seconds of the first shot. The artillery that was supposed to suppress the island's defenders had just announced its own location to the most precise counter-battery system ever deployed in the Korean theater. What happened in the next 44 minutes erased 600 kPa naval infantry from the Yellow Sea and reduced the Korean People's Army's amphibious capability by an estimated 60%. At 3:11 a.m., the first Kongbang landing craft crossed the northern limit line, 12 of them, running at 50 knots across choppy black water in a snow squall. The KPA naval infantry aboard them were cold and wet and certain of their mission. Their officers had told them the island would be lightly defended, that the garrison would be surprised, that the artillery and the helicopters would clear the way. None of those things were true, but they did not know that yet. The ROK Marine garrison on Baengnyeong had been at its defensive positions for 17 minutes. The island's coastal artillery battery, 4 K-9 Thunder self-propelled howitzers, had received the counter-battery fire mission data from the Firefinder radar at 3:10 a.m. and had already computed firing solutions on 11 kPa artillery positions on the North Korean mainland coast. They were waiting for the order to return fire. The order came at 3:14 a.m. 4 K-9 howitzers firing simultaneously, each capable of 3 rounds per minute sustained fire. Put 12 rounds in the air in their first salvo. The counter-battery fire landed on pre-plotted KPA artillery positions, while the North Korean guns were still firing their suppression barrage. 3 KPA artillery pieces were destroyed in the first ROK counter-battery salvo. 2 more were hit in the second. The suppression barrage began to thin. The AH-1Z Vipers from USS Wasp arrived over Baengnyeong at 3:33 a.m., 22 minutes after the landing craft crossed the NLL, with the first KPA assault elements already reaching the island's northwestern beach. The Vipers found a situation that was not the easy suppression mission they might have expected. The ROK Marine garrison, warned 17 minutes in advance, fully at their positions, fighting with the ferocity that Republic of Korea Marines are known for throughout the Pacific, had already stopped the first wave on the beach. The KPA naval infantry, who had reached the shoreline, were pinned by defensive fire from ROK positions in the island's rocky coastal terrain. The armored personnel carriers that had come ashore were engaged by ROK anti-tank teams armed with Javelin missiles supplied by the United States. 2 APCs were burning on the beach before the Vipers arrived. The Vipers went to work on the landing craft still approaching from the sea. The AH-1Z carries the same Hellfire missiles, the same 20mm rotary cannon, the same targeting systems as its Marine Corps predecessors, optimized and refined into the most lethal attack helicopter currently operated by any military force. A Kongbang-class air cushion landing craft doing 50 knots on a Black Sea in a snow squall is a large, fast, loud, and thermally visible target. The Viper's FLIR targeting systems cut through the weather effortlessly. In 14 minutes of engagement, the 8 Vipers destroyed 7 of the remaining 9 Kongbang landing craft still at sea. The 8th was disabled and left dead in the water. The 9th turned and ran back toward the North Korean coast. It was tracked by the Global Hawk overhead and engaged 20 minutes later by an F-16 CJ Maverick missile that ended its escape 9 kilometers from the North Korean shoreline. The KPA assault force on Sochong Island, 4 hovercraft, 38 naval infantry, was resolved quickly. UH-1Y Venoms from USS Wasp inserted a 40-man ROK Marine Rapid Reaction Force onto Sochong's central plateau at 3:41 a.m. before the KPA element could establish defensive positions. With AH-1Z close air support overhead, the counterattack lasted 11 minutes. The KPA force surrendered collectively at 3:52 a.m., the largest single KPA surrender since the Korean War. The F-35As were overhead, Baengnyeong, and the surrounding waters by 3:21 a.m. Their first priority was the Mi-24 Hinds attack helicopters that had been providing fire support to the KPA assault. The Mi-24 is a formidable helicopter against ground targets. Against a fifth-generation stealth fighter carrying AIM-9X missiles at night, it has no answer. The F-35As detected the Mi-24S on their AN/APG-81 radar before the Hinds were within 20 kilometers of the island. 6 AMRAAMs were fired in a coordinated salvo targeting 6 Mi-24s simultaneously. All 6 missiles found their targets. The remaining 6 Hinds, suddenly aware that they were being engaged by an adversary they could not detect, broke formation and fled northwest at maximum speed. 2 were pursued and destroyed by the F-35A's bears over North Korean territorial waters. 4 reached the North Korean coastline and landed at the nearest available airfield, their crews shaken and their attack mission abandoned. The 2 Il-76 transport aircraft carrying the KPA Special Operations Reserve Force had been circling offshore at medium altitude when the Mi-24s were destroyed. Their pilots, monitoring the radio traffic of the collapsing assault, made the only rational decision available to them. They turned north and flew back to North Korea. The Special Operations Force they were carrying was never employed. The F-16CJ's primary mission was suppression of the KPA Coastal Air Defense Network. The mobile SA-series surface-to-air missile batteries that North Korea had positioned on its western coast specifically to deter exactly the kind of air intervention that was now being executed against the assault force. The F-16CJs carried AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles. When the KPA air defense batteries activated their fire control radars to engage the incoming US and ROK aircraft, the HARMs were already locked on their emissions. 7 KPA SAM batteries were struck and destroyed within 12 minutes of the F-16CJs reaching their firing positions. The Western Coastal Air Defense Network of North Korea in the operational area went silent. With the SAM threat suppressed, additional ROK Air Force, KF-16S and F-15KS joined the strike package over the Yellow Sea, targeting the KPA naval infantry still fighting on Baengnyeong's beaches and the disabled landing craft in the water. At 3:47 a.m., 36 minutes after the first KPA landing craft crossed the NLL, Combined Forces Command authorized the counter-fire mission against the KPA Coastal Defense Command facilities on the North Korean mainland coast. This was not counter-battery fire against individual artillery pieces. This was a deliberate strike against the command infrastructure that had ordered and was directing the assault. 24 ATACMS, Army Tactical Missile System rounds, were fired from M270 multiple launch rocket systems positioned on the South Korean mainland. Each ATACMS carries a 500-kilogram unitary warhead to a range of over 300 kilometers with GPS precision. Their targets were the KPA Western Coastal Defense Command headquarters at Koampo, the naval infantry staging base that had launched the assault force, the fuel and ammunition depot supporting the assault, and the radar facility that had been providing targeting data to the Mi-24 attack helicopters. 4 targets, 24 ATACMS, 8 minutes of flight time. All 4 facilities were struck within a 90-second impact window. The Koampo Naval Station, from which the 12 Kongbang landing craft had sortied, was destroyed. The headquarters building, the pier infrastructure, the vehicle park, and the fuel storage tanks were all struck. The secondary explosions from the fuel and ammunition storage burned for 4 hours and were visible from Seoul. The MV-22 Ospreys from USS Wasp inserted 200 Marines from the 31st MEU onto Baengnyeong at 3:55 a.m. They landed on the island's central plateau, the same plateau the KPA's Special Operations Force had been assigned to drop onto, and moved immediately to support the ROK Marine garrison in its final clearance of the KPA naval infantry, who had made it ashore. The fighting in the island's rocky coastal terrain was close and intense, and lasted until 4:38 a.m., when the last organized KPA resistance on the island collapsed. KPA naval infantry, who attempted to escape by sea, were tracked and engaged by Viper helicopters and by ROK Navy patrol vessels that had been sortied from Incheon at the moment the alert was issued. The full accounting, compiled by Combined Forces Command by 7 a.m. the same morning. KPA naval infantry, who reached Baengnyeong Island, approximately 220. Of those, 141 killed in action, 63 captured and taken into ROK custody, 16 unaccounted for, assessed as lost at sea. 0 KPA naval infantry escaped the island and returned to North Korea. Of the 12 Kongbang landing craft, 9 destroyed at sea by Viper helicopters, 1 disabled and subsequently sunk by ROK Navy, 1 destroyed by F-16 CJ Maverick strike, 1 captured intact and towed to Incheon as intelligence exploitation asset. KPA assault force on Sochong Island, 38 naval infantry, all captured. Mi-24 Hinds helicopters, 8 destroyed, 4 fled. Both IL-76 transports. Returned to North Korea without completing their mission. KPA coastal SAM batteries destroyed. 7. KPA artillery pieces destroyed by counter-battery fire. 11. Koampo Naval Station destroyed. KPA Western Coastal Defense Command headquarters destroyed. KPA ammunition and fuel depot destroyed. ROK Marine Corps killed in action on Baengnyeong. 11. Wounded. 27. U.S. casualties. 0 killed, 0 wounded. USS Wasp undamaged. 0 U.S. aircraft lost. Baengnyeong Island remained South Korean territory. The ROK flag flew over every defensive position on the island when the sun rose at 7:22 a.m. on a morning that was clear and cold and entirely free of snow squalls. The garrison that had been warned 17 minutes before the assault had held. The Vipers had arrived in time. The F-35As had killed the Mi-24s before they could suppress the defenders. The ATACMS had destroyed the base from which the assault had launched. And the Marines from USS Wasp had cleared the last KPA resistance before 5 a.m. In Pyongyang, Kim Jong-un received the battle damage assessment in silence. The island that was supposed to fall in 90 minutes had not fallen. The assault force that was supposed to demonstrate KPA power had been destroyed. 12 landing craft gone, 600 naval infantry dead or captured. The Koampo Naval Station that had taken years to build reduced to burning rubble. The Mi-24s that were supposed to suppress the garrison had been killed in the dark by aircraft they never detected. The Special Operations Force that was supposed to exploit the initial assault had turned around and flown home. And the Coastal Air Defense Network that was supposed to deter U.S. air intervention had been silenced by HARM missiles in 12 minutes. The proof of concept that Pyongyang had sought, the demonstration that the Kim regime could take South Korean territory at will, could embarrass the United States, could win, had produced the opposite result. Every element of the operation had failed. Every assumption had been wrong. And the cost had been borne entirely by the 600 men who had crossed the northern limit line at 50 knots in the dark, certain of their mission, sailing directly into the prepared response of a combined alliance that had been tracking them since their engines started. The Yellow Sea returned to its normal gray chop as the day progressed. USS Wasp recovered her aircraft and resumed her operational posture. The Global Hawk continued its surveillance orbit at 65,000 feet. The Firefinder radars on Baengnyeong resumed their quiet watch over the water. The K-9 howitzers sat in their revetments, reloaded and ready. And on the beach where the KPA naval infantry had come ashore in the dark, ROK Marine engineers were already surveying the wreckage of 2 burned-out armored personnel carriers and marking the positions where they would build new defensive obstacles before the next night fell. The island endured, as it had always endured, as it would continue to endure. This is what happens when you attempt to seize the territory of a United States treaty ally by amphibious assault. You do not find a sleeping garrison and a blind surveillance network. You find acoustic sensors on the seafloor that hear your engines start 20 minutes before you cross the border. You find a global hawk at 65,000 feet that watches your helicopters spin up in the dark. You find an amphibious assault ship 49 miles away with 8 AH-1Z Vipers already turning their rotors. You find F-35As overhead before your Mi-24s reach the island, killing them with missiles they never saw coming. You find ATACMS already computed and fired against the base you launched from, arriving while your assault force is still fighting on the beach. You find that the combined military force of the United States and the Republic of Korea, two of the most capable militaries on Earth, bound by 70 years of alliance and decades of joint preparation, is not surprised. It is not slow. It is not hesitant. It is waiting. 44 minutes. That was the measure of Kim Jong-un's amphibious ambition. 44 minutes from the moment the first landing craft crossed the NLL to the moment the last organized KPA resistance on Baengnyeong collapsed. In those 44 minutes, 600 men and 12 ships and 12 helicopters and the operational infrastructure of an entire coastal defense command had been erased from the Yellow Sea. And Baengnyeong Island, 17 kilometers from North Korea, the thorn that Pyongyang had always resented, was still South Korean, still defended, still there. It always will be.